Ohayo gozaimasu. Irashaimase. Welcome to a return of my Mikio-thon. What was the Naruse a day troll through as many Naruse films as I could see. I have a few more that I would like to review in wrapping up this what feels in some ways like an epic undertaking. I hope those of you who've watched have found interesting and useful. And I'm going to continue today with a film that, although it is little seen and comparatively little commented upon, is, or should be seen as, I think, one of the great director's key films. It's a film that succinctly represents, I think, what Naruse does cinematically, what he stands for, how he goes about doing it, and it demonstrates this through a slight overlap with other directors with whom Naruse is often more or less carelessly lumped together with. So figures like Ozu Yasujiro or Shimizu Hiroshi. He does have some traits in common with these directors, of course, but I think Naruse tackles the genre of the shomingeki or shoshimingeki in a very distinctive and different way. And today's film, A Wife's Heart, I think demonstrates very clearly and very concisely that difference and that sense of divergence from his closest cinematic contemporaries. A Wife's Heart concerns a family that is in crisis in various ways. It stars perhaps the most common and identifiable Naruse acting collaborator, Takamine Hideko, as a housewife. With her husband, she is looking to extend the family home, which she shares with her mother-in-law, and from which a business is run, a small sort of grocery store, as far as we can tell, into a cafe. They want to extend a bit of vacant space adjacent to the house into a cafe. Returning to the family home is her brother-in-law and his wife and young daughter, who it transpires have hit very hard times in Tokyo. Her brother-in-law has lost his job as a salaryman. His company has gone under, and it turns out that he is eager, if not desperate, to borrow money from his brother, Takamine's husband, in order to set himself up. Now, this loan requires that Takamine and her husband give up, to a certain extent, their dreams of opening a cafe and lend the money that they were going to use in order to establish said concern. This obviously sets up a prominent tension, and this is only exacerbated when Takamine's mother-in-law urges her daughter-in-law and her younger son, Takamine's husband, to indeed lend the money. Takamine's brother-in-law is the elder of the two brothers, and she the mother thinks that he needs it and believes his promise that it will be a once-in-a-lifetime loan. And she sort of favours her eldest sibling, largely, I think, because she, from the very beginning, is suspicious of and ultimately not in favour of the cafe being built. She speaks about this in quite pejorative terms in the opening scene of the film. So her views are very much set in stone from the beginning. There are other subsidiary characters, some members of the family, like Takamine's young sister-in-law, a younger sibling for the two brothers, who is just about to get married, an arranged marriage by her mother, who, again, it transpires, has arranged many marriages and is very proud of having done so. And there is a friend of Takamine's, whose husband, played by Mifune Toshiro, in a key role, is a banker, and for whom Takamine turns to help secure the loans that she needs. So this is very much an ensemble film. Takamine, although in some ways central, certainly by dint of being identifiable as the key Naruse actress, is not, in fact, someone we could clearly and confidently describe as the protagonist of the film. Her narrative, her personal trajectory, in which she becomes ever more disillusioned with her husband, who begins to treat her in an offhand way and to take respite away from the home, and a burgeoning relationship, although only through implication, with Mifune's banker, is in fact something of a conduit for, or a window through which we can view the stories of others. So she is a kind of focal point of the narrative. All the stories, in one way or another, flow through her, but we depart from her point of view and her consciousness in key ways. This is typically, for Naruse, a film with very unrestricted narration, in which we are very much aware of things going on that Takamine's ostensible protagonist is very much, and remains very much for a lot of the time, unaware. Now, chief among the representative aspects of this film is the way that Naruse deals with narrative. The structure of this film is generally linear in terms of how the story develops, how the characters' trajectories are realised. But the way that Naruse constructs this, his editing and decoupage, is infinitely complex, layered, textured. There is a constant sense of micro narratives here, in fact, rather than any single overarching narrative. I think the desire for Takamine and her husband to open a cafe is one that gives some structure to the narrative, but it's almost like a foundation upon which these other, as I said, micro narratives are built. There's a constant sense here of stories colliding into one another, of small narratives developing contrapuntally alongside one another. there's a lot of cross-cutting here. Naruse very rarely in this film, if at all, stays with one scene while a narrative point is made without him cutting away to other action, sometimes in a contiguous space, so within the same house, for instance, sometimes to actions taking place in different locations. This is most obvious when we appear to be getting scenes set up for a meaningful connection, even relationship being established between Takamine and Mifune. There, on 2 or 3 occasions, are the beginnings of a scene in which there appear to be emotions sort of bubbling under the surface that we expect will be traced and developed. But after sort of introductory niceties, Naruse cuts away, and in only one instance actually cuts back to trace anything like a development or a meaningful sort of narrative point. I think the point here is not only to stress what I said at the beginning of this review, that there is no single focalizing agent, there is no central protagonist, there is no central dramatic story or arc here, but it is to thematize a sense of movement, indeed of overcrowding, given that the family home at the centre is both a place of living and a place of work, and is indeed in process of being developed into a further place of business. And given that it is ultimately a small house that unhappily accommodates or comes to accommodate different family members who are increasingly getting in each other's way, treading on each other's toes, what have you. There is a sense of, as it were, overcrowding. And I think the fact that no single story emerges suggests this sort of lack of space, if you like, this lack of breathing room for any of these characters. There is, in consequence, a constant sense of movement on the periphery of this narrative, and we get a sense as we are becoming more and more cognizant of this narrative structure, we get a sense developing of almost anxiety we feel as scenes are introduced or characters are interacting, that other characters are perhaps watching, or other characters are going about their lives in ways that may well, and indeed often do, run counter to what's happening in that particular scene or in any given scene. So there is this constant impression of movement, even when we get characters in one place sitting and talking, as we do in some scenes, not that many. We are anxious, we are uncertain as to what else is going on, what else may intrude on this dialogue or this burgeoning relationship, what other characters may see, what other characters may overhear. There are numerous scenes in which Naruse cuts away to characters looking on, sort of almost spying, but not quite, because they often just happen upon the action or dialogue of any given scene. So this sense of stories and characters sort of crashing into one another is one that really takes on a thematic weight. I I said that this is something that Ozu in particular treats ostensibly in a comparable way. Many of his films, for instance, I think Tokyo Story, even more prominently Early Summer, which features a family of three generations living under the same roof. The fact that we ultimately have three generations here, especially when the young daughter of Takamine's brother-in-law is left behind to stay with Takamine, with her husband and with her mother-in-law. We similarly get a sense of different generations here, but the way they are constantly falling over themselves and falling over each other, if you like, the way that their business is constantly out in the open, really runs quite markedly counter to Ozu's vision. Not that Ozu's vision is necessarily of a completely harmonious family home in which, you know, these three generations live in complete happiness, each with the other. But there is not at all the sense of these characters getting in each other's way and their interests colliding as we have here. And I think this is something that stands as representative of a post-war moment, a sense that this is a kind of social phenomenon, if you like, that is increasingly becoming untenable in the way that Japan is developing, the way that, you know, for instance, businesses are struggling, as Takamine's brother-in-law's firm is very much doing. So we get a sort of cross section, if you like, of different generations as representative of the fractiousness of contemporary Japan and the different generations that are represented within this house. It's very much a microcosm of a country that is pulling in different directions and in which personal or individual proclivities have very little sway because they're not really able to breathe or have any sort of space to develop. The fact of these stories and characters constantly bouncing off and clashing with one another leads to the thematic sort of foundations emerging. One of these is marriage. There are various different marriages compared and contrasted. And looking forward, marriage is something that is talked about with regard to characters who are not yet married. This goes for the central couple, but as much for instance, Mifune's currently single sister with whom he lives, and with a young geisha frequented by Takamine's husband, who suffers a tragic fate, albeit entirely off screen, that is put down to her own marital difficulties. Another, interestingly, is children. This is something that emerges towards the end of the narrative. There's a very key scene in which Takamine and Mifune observe children running and talk briefly about the man's desire for children, and he in turn asks Takamine about having children. This is something that at that time in the narrative is an absence in her life, But in the following scene, it transpires that Takamine's young niece, who's been staying, her brother-in-law's young girl, is going to stay with them. So in effect, she does kind of acquire a daughter, a child. There is no great sort of overwhelming or melodramatic or sentimental breaking through of the reserve that hitherto has marked Takamine's relationship with this young girl, which has been noticeably and quite boldly non-existent throughout the narrative. But the sense that she now has to live with a young child whose parents are not around makes one aware of the way that her own sort of familial situation is developing towards the end of the narrative. I won't say any more about this and ruin anything, but suffice it to say that, in fact, despite my protestations that this is a very representative Naruse picture, in fact, it is ultimately, in one key sense, not representative, because it is a film that, unusually for its director, has quite a sunny, almost positive conclusion. I think there are several sort of potential clouds crossing the path and blocking out potentially this sunshine that we infer at the film's close, but it is generally more bright than is the typical Naruse coda. So for that reason, I think it's one that I can recommend as not being too dour. For those of you who may have found other Naruse films, certainly from this period of his career, a little bit too downbeat, this is one that may well leave you with a little bit more of a smile on your face. So give it a look. I'm going to record an extra sort of scene analysis for this film to accompany this video, so do look out for that. Pop your comments below, like and subscribe, or don't, and I will see you very soon with more content. Bye for now.